Good evening. Welcome to the Redevelopment Agency meeting for April 27th, 2021. This meeting is being conducted in accordance with emergency directives from Governor Sisolak. In-person attendance for the meeting is limited as a result. Public comment may have been made prior to the meeting by email or voicemail and will also be taken during the meeting via phone. With that, items listed on the agenda may be taken out of order. Two or more agenda items for consideration may be combined, and any item on the agenda may be removed or related discussion may be delayed at any time. I will call the meeting to order, and we will begin with the first public comment period. Public comment during this period must be limited to items on the agenda. Speakers have up to 5 minutes to speak. And as always, we ask that people be civil and concise with their comments. Is there anyone in chambers that would like to speak during public comment? All right. Anyone wishing to call in, the phone number is 702-589-9629. This is the initial public comment period for the Redevelopment Agency meeting. The phone number to call is 702-589-9629. All right, hearing no one for public comment, we will close the initial public comment period. Not yet, we won't.
Public comment. Hello? Public comment. Hopefully they'll call back.
If someone is trying to call, the number is 702-589-9629 for the initial public comment period. All right, well, it appears we do not have anyone for public comment. I think there's a spy in the room.
Public comment.
Yes, I'd like to make public comment.
Go ahead.
All right. This is Judy DeShane. My public comment has to do with item 3, I believe that's the one for 524 Nevada. I just want to say I object to it being approved, being that the door is being moved. That was not moved prior, and that appears to be, looking at everything else on that street, it appears to be it's where it has always been, and I don't think it's historical to move it. Barring that, I don't think things on the second floor should be covered under the grant either, because my understanding is that is going to be private space for office and such, which I totally understand, but I do not think it should be paid for with RDA money. Those are the two main things I have about it, so I just wanted to comment on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, this is our initial public comment period. Anyone wishing to call in, the phone number 702-589-9629. And Madam City Clerk, I had not inquired, were there any written or voicemails submitted?
No comments were submitted.
Thank you. All right, hearing no others for public comment, we will then close the public comment period and move to item number 1 for possible action, approval of the minutes of the March 23rd RDA meeting. Madam City Clerk?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members, there was one change to page 5 of the minutes, and there before you was just a minor change.
Thank you. Any other changes or comments? Anyone wishing to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes of March 23rd. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, we'll move to item number 2 for possible action, discussion, and staff directive. Mr. Fistection.
Good evening, Chairman and RDA agency members. Rafi Fistiction, the city's Economic Development Coordinator. According to NRS, each legislative body shall create a revolving loan account. A revolving loan fund is a gap financing measure primarily used for the development and expansion of small businesses within the redevelopment district. Each redevelopment agency must adopt regulations for the application process, terms, and criteria for the loan from its revolving loan account. $5,000 has been allocated to this year's budget. The program guidelines are attached in the packet. Money can be used for interior remodeling, working capital, equipment, or new construction. Loan amounts range from $1,000 to $5,000 depending on the availability of the funds. The interest rate would be set at the prime rate. A lien on real estate or equipment would be required, or a personal guarantee from the applicant. In conducting our research, we cannot find an example of another local jurisdiction utilizing, using, or promoting this program. Staff believes the overhead costs and resources of launching and administrating this program make it cost prohibitive. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Mr. Fistection, thank you for the presentation. in looking through the details of this, I think a borrower, a potential borrower would have a very narrow window where something like this may be needed. This money is reserved within the RDA fund, but does not build. In other words, it doesn't roll over from year to year. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? Anyone wishing to make a motion then regarding the continuation of this fund? I'll move to continue the fund as it has been previously defined. Anyone wishing to second that motion?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you, sir. Move then to item number 3 for possible action, resolution number 230 regarding the property at 524 Nevada Way. Mr. Fistection, please.
Tap Water Management Group, LLC, members Larry and Grant Turner have applied and are seeking RDA funding through the RDA Historic Preservation Grant Program in order to make improvements to the property located at 524 Nevada Way, formerly known as Back in Time Antiques. This application came before the agency last month on March 23rd for consideration. The agency board raised concerns about its adherence to the Historic Preservation Grant Program guidelines and how it complies with the Secretary of Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties. Staff circled back and met with the applicants along with the Historic Preservation Committee member Davenport to thoroughly review the application once again. In addition, staff felt it was appropriate to get further guidance from an outside consulting agency, Northwind Resource Consulting, who could assign a historic preservation planner that is knowledgeable of the Secretary of Interior's standards. The consultant, Courtney Mooney's evaluation is contained in the report packet. The Historic Preservation Committee held a special meeting on April 12th to review the more detailed application. The motion was to recommend approval of the list of project items with the exception of the parapet changes per the opinion of the consultant and subject to the determination of SOI eligibility of the remodel work, once again per pending information from the consultant. The consultant reviewed the activity analysis worksheet and has identified $203,343 in eligible improvements. This is the third historic RDA grant application that is being considered since the board approved the guidelines just over a year ago. The RDA historic preservation budget is $100,000 for this fiscal year. The 2 previous approved projects were for a total of $63,132. The remaining fund balance for this fiscal year is $36,868. The applicants are requesting RDA consideration for the first phase of their project, which entails $79,800 of improvements. Eligible improvements for the first phase include design plans, saw cut and concrete removal, excavation, footing stem walls and retaining walls, waterproofing, structural framing, and subfloor for entry ramp, as the property currently does not have ADA compliant restrooms. Other than the design plans, items for this first phase include ADA accessibility. Also, several improvements are associated with the structural stability of the building, as the plans were reviewed by the building official. The building official noted that due to the change of the occupancy type, meaning the location changing from a retail establishment to a bar A2, all accessibility requirements must be followed in accordance with the 2018 International Existing Building Code. Tap Water Management LLC would be eligible for up to 50% reimbursement of funds through this grant program. Based on eligible expenses for the first phase of the project, they could receive up to $36,868 in reimbursements. The applicants will need to submit a second application later this year for the final phase 2 of the project, totaling approximately $63,032 in reimbursement for fiscal year 22 historic RDA consideration. Between the two phases, the applicants are asking for the max RDA amount of $99,900. They understand that any eligible activities in that final phase may not begin until RDA agency approval. In addition, the applicants also understand that they are responsible for the continued maintenance and needed future repairs for any items that the agency board approves for a period of 10 years in order to preserve the historical qualities of the building. A total of 3 bids were submitted per NRS requirements. Newcastle Construction and Remodeling is owned and operated by one of the applicants. The city's RDA grant is awarded based on the lowest bid amount and does not preclude the applicant from applying. Larry and Grant Turner, along with Alan Stromberg, the architect, are here to answer any specific questions that you may have regarding their project. Thank you.
With regard to the change in use between retail and a bar, what is the difference in the code wording for the front door? Does it need to be wider? I don't understand what the difference is between those two establishments. You had indicated that the building official had reviewed that and that somehow there's some change that's required.
The code now basically would need to follow the 2018, basically accessibility needs to occur. So it follow now the 2018 International Existing Building Code, which I would not be able to define or answer in greater detail.
Sure, I understand. But what I'm saying is, regardless of whether it was a retail establishment or a bar, that requirement that you just referred to would still exist.
It's a change of use. If it were to remain a retail, then the door would still essentially need to be stay put, which is center to the location of the property.
Okay, what about a bar requires the door to be in a different location?
Mayor, the change in use triggers the application of the more current building code, I believe.
Okay, so if it had gone to an office space, let's say, commercial office space, that requirement would still be triggered then?
Correct.
And again, the placement or the location of the door is not the issue. It's the step that's there currently. Is that correct or incorrect? In other words, is the door width the same? What is it that's wrong with the door that would not currently comply?
Chair McManus, I think that with the detailed questions about ADA compliance, it would be best to have the architect respond, but generally with the building code, anytime a use within a building changes, it has to be brought into compliance with the most recent codes. And with respect to ADA compliance, it's a combination of factors including accessibility within the building, grade, door width, and approach. And we can certainly have the architect provide greater detail to that question.
Well, if the architect would like to comment on it, but Mr. Stromberg?
Hi, good evening. This is Alan Stromberg. The ADA, in fact, I looked it up again just this afternoon. In ADA, it's 4.1.6.I, allows us to do a short ramp. We'd have to have a ramp in there because right now, The building on the left-hand side of the door has a step that's about 2.5 inches high. The slidewalk slopes significantly from almost zero on the right-hand side of the front of the building down to about 4 inches on the other side. So right now you need some kind of a ramp. When we can't put a ramp, according to Public Works, they don't like ramps out in the public way. So we would have to recess the existing door. The distance of the ramp, which is 2 feet, to rise 3 inches, 2.5 inches. Then we'd need, by the building code and the ADA, you need a landing that's flat at the top of any ramp. And the landing has to be 5 feet by 5 feet. And so you've got a circular space so someone with a wheelchair can get up there and turn around if they don't want to go in. And you also need a 5 foot by 5 foot level space on the other side door. So the door in its present location would have to, we can take it out, but we'd have to excavate. Well, we still have to, excavate and then put a ramp in there, just like we're doing at the other end of the building. But it would only get us up to 3 inches. We still have to go back 5 feet and recess it. So we're back 7 feet, just like we had shown in our plan. But it wouldn't match the existing door width. We could get in there, but then we'd have to widen out to the 5 feet. So it's not going to look the same as the existing door no matter what we do. Then, additionally, if we come back in the middle of the building with an intrusion that far, and it'll be 6 feet wide the inside of the building. The building's going to be 6 feet wide when we go in there. So you take 6 feet out of the middle of that building, 8 feet back. That really limits what you can do on either side as far as use. It just really dictates the use of those areas. So it's really a problem. By moving the door to the high side, we kept the opening where the existing window was, just simply cut out the sill. So that opening remains the same width and size, and everything stays the same. We make the ramp up 3 inches, go back to 5 feet, put the door in there. And that leaves us the rest of the space to use for the function of the building.
Are you talking about recessing the door 5 feet into the building?
7 feet. It has to be because we need a 2 foot ramp plus a 5 foot landing by code. It's a 5 by 5 landing is required at any door.
Okay.
So then also inside, it was the owner's desire to, and it made sense also because to raise the floor up 3 inches so we can shorten the ramp at the back of the building and allow the bar to be the full length that it needs to be. The ramp at the back of the building can't go in and turn any farther. I guess there's no plan there, but it can't go back and turn any farther. It has to come straight down the side of the building and run into the end of the bar. But again, there we need that 5 foot by 5 foot landing at the end of that ramp. So to save that extra 3 feet on the interior ramp length that is needed to get to the restroom at the back of the building, we raised that floor by 3 inches. So putting that door down there solved both problems. It solved the 3 inches because the sidewalk raises 3 inches. Then we raised the 3 inches that we did with the original plan and matched the new wood floor. But the door in the original location just simply would never look the same anyway because it's got to still recess back that far.
Anything else regarding the requirement for that?
No, that's basically the requirement. You need to access the floor of the building, you know, that's ADA. That's also ANSI 117, which is the building code. And then in both of those documents, you do need a landing that's 5 feet square on both sides of the door. The other ramp at the rear of the building up to restrooms is already as steep as it can get, so nothing else we can do there. So moving the door to the right to get at the high end of the sidewalk is absolutely critical to make it inside space work. And I've done a lot of study and seen a lot of publications on adaptive reuse of buildings. And sometimes things have to be done to make the inside of the building so it's able to be reused in any fashion. You know, that one was retail, it didn't really matter, but when you do it for something else, you want to maximize the use of the space. It's the only thing that can be done.
Well, I understand wanting to maximize the space, and, you know, that's, I guess, where the trade-off comes, is that what we're doing, or are we trying to be compliant with the ADA requirements?
It's both. We need to raise that floor 3 inches. We need, by moving that to all the way to the far right, where the sidewalk slopes from 0 on the east end to -4 inches on the other end, and the door now is in the middle, 2.5 inches down. We need to get that door up to the floor level.
So you're taking out all of the interior floor at the front of the building to raise that up, is that it?
Yeah, we would have to, if the door stays in the same place, we'd have to take that up. If we move it down to the high end, we're not gonna have to take that up, because it just goes up from there.
Well, that's what I'm asking, though. I know, looking at the estimate, there's work in there about saw cutting floors and
Right,
replacing
yes, there might
flooring.
still be some small adjustments required, but it wouldn't be nearly as much as going in the center one, you know, in the center position.
Okay, but again, that's what I'm getting at, is the work that's already proposed is going to be making some adjustment on the interior floor to get it up to a height that is required.
Correct,
Okay, so that part's already being done.
yes.
So the issue then is from the public right-of-way, the public sidewalk, right at the doorway is what
Correct.
you're referring to,
Yes.
okay? Any other questions from board members? Board Member Bridges?
Yes, thank you. Okay, I do have a question about the door. Even if it stayed where it was, it still has to be moved back 5 feet, correct?
Pardon me?
Even if the door stayed in the middle, it would still have to be moved back to
Yes,
create.
correct. To get the
a
5-foot
alcove.
width and to get the ramp up to the floor level, it would have to be moved way back in. It would be moved in 7 feet.
Okay. And also the design and the architectural dimensions and all that has been approved with the door in the new location by both Northwind in terms of the Secretary of the Interior Standards and the Historic Preservation Committee, correct?
That's my understanding. I didn't read the report from Northwind, but I understood that.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's actually a misconception, because the door itself is noted in the Northwind report as not being appropriate. The door that is being shown is not appropriate.
But that's
So-
just the actual door, not the location.
Correct, but
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
talking about the door now, and I just want to correct that misperception that the door is compliant, because it is not. The Northwind report makes that clear. There are other issues that the Northwind report also makes clear do not comply with the Secretary of Interior standards, one of those being work on the parapet wall. And from what I see in the packet, the applicant has said they won't change the parapet wall. Is that well, you shouldn't be answering this, Mr. Stromberg.
Sure, I wasn't aware of that conversation.
So, Mr. Fistection?
That's correct. The applicants agreed to leave the parapet wall.
So in fact, the Northwind report came back saying that there were elements of this project that were not in compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards, regardless of ADA questions. One being the door, one being the parapet, and I believe there was another issue in here that Northwind said was not in compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, does the applicant wish to make further changes to bring those items into compliance?
To bring which items into compliance?
Well, the door itself was found not to be in compliance. The door that's being proposed was found not to be in compliance.
Right, and I think Mr. Stromberg did a pretty good job of explaining why it has to move. It's just
No, I'm not talking
technically-
about moving. I'm talking about the door itself.
The actual existing door?
Well, the door that you propose to put in is not of the same type, not of the same design as the door that's currently there, and therefore would not be compliant with the standards.
We're talking about the physical door, not the location.
Correct.
I think we're willing to, the same way we were flexible on the parapet wall, we're certainly flexible on the door.
Okay.
Yeah, up until this point, we have not seen a single photograph of the building in its original state.
Well, we know what the existing door looks like. It's still there.
You think that's the original door?
I don't know.
That's what I'm saying.
But
Nobody
what
does.
I'm saying is that's what's in the Northwind evaluation, is that the door that you have proposed, the design of the door that you have proposed, does not meet the standards.
Then we'll meet the standards.
Other questions from board members? Member Hoskins?
Yes, this question is, well, first of all, I'd like to ask Mr. Mays a question, and then you a question later.
Certainly.
Mr. Mays. As I previously stated in other RDA meetings, I believe that there's a regulation that states in order to qualify for RDA funding, you must meet a requirement that the application is unable to get funding elsewhere. Documents stating such have not been part of any of the RDA packets now or previously. Would you please explain for me again, and for those who are listening, why we're not adhering to that requirement?
So the intent with that provision, and with any incentives that are provided by a municipality toward a private entity, is the but-for clause. But for the incentives being provided by the municipality, the project and the scope of that project would not be accomplished in the same manner. The RDA's intent is to incentivize people to reinvest in the old parts of our community that have been identified within the RDA district, to encourage them to reinvest in older properties specifically, and but for the RDA funds, they may not make the same level of investment in that property, and that's the purpose for providing those funds.
But we never asked that question, if they would do it if they didn't have the funding, or they wouldn't do it if they had the funding. The question is never posed to the applicant, correct?
What we do is when people are looking at purchasing or investing in a property, we meet with them to discuss the grant opportunities. And in many examples, it helps to encourage their consideration of that property over another property, perhaps a property that is newer and needs less work to renovate and utilize for their purposes. And then that encourages reinvestment within the RDA.
Thank you. And to Mr. Turner? Having gone through this process with the Historic Preservation Committee twice and gotten their approval, how has the historic RDA money made a difference in the building design following the Secretary of Interior's standards?
We certainly compromised. The parapet wall the parapet wall as it exists is not a very impressive feature of the building, especially relative to the buildings on either side of it. The coffee cup which I think originally was the green hut, has a pretty ornate parapet. So competing with that, we thought we could step up the game. The Historic Preservation Committee advised that we keep it original, and we were willing to do so. Similarly, the windows, I was in favor just aesthetically of doing what's referred to as a peekaboo window on the left side. They advised that we go to the original, the most original state, which is a photo from, I believe, the 80s, 82, which is smaller in size than what is currently there, but not as small as I would have elected to go with just aesthetically, but we made the compromise. The windows themselves, we're going with examples of original Boulder City architecture, which also wasn't my first choice, but we're, that's part of, I think that's part of the incentive to cooperate, which everybody wins. I think the Historic Preservation Committee's delighted that the building is going to stay as original as possible, but also be adaptively reused, and we're incentivized to do so with a grant.
Okay, and one other question, please. Would you follow the guidance of the Historic Preservation Committee if you were denied the RDA funding? And would you go ahead and proceed with the renovation of the building if you didn't get the RDA funding?
I think, so the two questions, I think certainly I'd be less incentivized to keep it original if not for the grant, and similarly the scope of the improvements, as Michael said, if not but for the grant. I'm not sure that wording was correct, but yeah, I think that certainly, especially when it deals with something like ADA, which that's not very sexy money. You know what I mean? That's not money. That's not wall cladding, or that's not light fixtures. That's just it's nuts and bolts money that you got to spend to achieve ADA access.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Board Member Bridges?
Yeah, I appreciate the work that you've done on this. It's interesting. I met today with somebody about accessibility issues in Boulder City, and I look at this doorway with the arch in front of it and the pole from the arch right in front of the doorway, and appreciate the fact that it is necessary to move the door in order to have sufficient space for somebody with a seeing eye dog or in a wheelchair or in a scooter that has to get through there. And also, I know I'm harping on the door, but the fact that in its original state, it is not ADA compliant. Where it is right now, how wide it is, the fact that there is no platform for turning around, it's 7-foot setback and so on. That's going to have to be in there, whether the door is in the middle or the side. Also, the caller talked about the second floor bathroom, ADA. Is that second floor bathroom accessible to somebody with a disability in a wheelchair or?
It is.
It is.
It is. The so the second floor has access through the alley. Mm-hmm. Contrary to the Miss Duchesne who called in, that the second floor is not used for offices. It's not private space. It's all public space, and the restroom is ADA accessible.
Also, if it was required, would you be able to do the necessary research to find a front door or design a front door that matched historically what the other front doors along that stretch of road looked like in the historic district?
Certainly, those were comments I think we made to HPC that we look forward to working with them, getting examples of precedents for early Boulder City architecture, specifically entry doors and modeling a front. I think it would be difficult maybe to find one that fits perfectly, but we would certainly use our skilled subcontractors to replicate one.
Thank you.
Thank you. And to your point about the ramp, yeah, it's, especially with a narrow building, anytime you have a ramp in the center, it just limits the use on either side of the ramp. So the best solution for ADA access was to move the door. Thank you.
Just for clarification, how is the second floor accessible to a person with disabilities?
From the alley.
Is there an elevator back there, or a ramp, or
The alley
is the
has.
level of the alley up to the second story level?
It is.
Okay.
There's a massive grade change in the back. The rear of the building has a flight of stairs that gets up to the alley level, and the alley is accessible directly, back behind the coffee cup and Milo's cellar. That is where ADA.
Okay, so I'm confused now. Are there stairs from the alley up to the second floor?
No, sir. There are stairs from the building up to this second floor alley.
So within the building, there's
Within
a
the
set
building,
of
there are stairs, and then from the alley, it's just accessible without stairs.
Okay, so it's a ground level, and there's no steps or any other work that you'll need to do to make that accessible? It's already ADA compliant the way it is?
No, not currently. There is a step currently, and we will have to remove that and ramp to it. There is definitely work to be done, but that's all included in the plans.
Okay. I'm going to read a portion of the Northwind report that's actually quoting from the Secretary of Interior standards. And that is, but it is important that such alterations do not radically change, obscure, or destroy character-defining spaces, materials, features, or finishes. If we look at a property and say, well, I'm going to do something that, is 5 doors down, I don't believe that's compliant with what the Secretary of Interior standards are. So to come up with a solution, well, it looks like another door at another location on another building. That's not what the point is of the Secretary of Interior standards. The point is that the building exists, and that to be able to go back with something that is the same architectural features of what is currently there, not what's next door or across the street or down the block, but what's there on that building. That's, in my interpretation anyway, what the Secretary of Interior standards say. So again, I want to make sure what it is that we're doing here, and the fact that this council created this grant specifically to preserve the existing architecture that we have. We could have done something else. We could have said, we don't want this, we don't care if we're actually doing historic preservation. And we could have left the grant that was already in effect that provides for a 30% match for exterior work. But specifically, we said that it is a important thing for this city, for the businesses in this city, for the community at large, to stress historic preservation. So we added an incentive to that. And I think when applicants come and say, well, I want that incentive, I want that, to then say, well, I'm going to do something that sort of maybe doesn't necessarily agree, the parapet wall, the design of the door, those types of things, that's not what this grant is about. So I want to make that perfectly clear that what this grant is about is to preserve the architectural features of the buildings as they are. Not to say, well, I'll do something that might sort of look like something else. I just want to make that abundantly clear that that's what this grant program is about. You're free at any time to apply for the other grant program. This particular one stresses that we want to preserve the architectural features of these buildings to the greatest extent possible without having to say every little thing we have to be looking out for. Any other questions from board members? Member Adams?
Thank you, Chairman. I asked that this item be held in abeyance because there were a lot of issues that came up. There were some questions about some of the eligibility of some of the items. There was concerns with some of the information that was brought forward to the board that wasn't made available to the Historic Preservation Committee at the time. Since then, we have had another meeting. They had about 2 hours they spent in really, I feel really working through what Northwind had provided, some of the information, and really trying to come to build consensus on what could be preserved to the best of our abilities. Obviously, the elephant in the room is the need to move and recess the door for ADA accessibility, but that's likely something that was going to have to happen regardless. There's some things which we cannot avoid. And so in the end, what is important is that we do work to preserve and to make sure that what we are getting at the end is to the best of our abilities to meet the Secretary of Interior standards. There are going to be conflicts with ADA compliance and with historic preservation. It's well noted in the Secretary of Interior standards works, and sometimes the ADA is often going to trump those historic preservation efforts. What I have seen is an applicant who has been willing to make the concessions to make sure that they are going in line with what is being asked of them. And the applicant is not a historic preservation specialist. I don't think that most people who come through these doors will be. So when they come through with items before us that they want to see for what they would like to be done, there is the expectation that they will be told these items are not in compliance and they should be done this way if you want to receive this funding. At the end of the day, I feel that after both the first meeting of the Historic Preservation Committee, reviewing the last meeting, reviewing Northwind's further review on this, I think that what we have come to is a point where we have an applicant who is very accommodating to making sure that they can do whatever they can to preserve and maintain as much of that building as possible, knowing that some of that will not be possible because of ADA requirements. So I think it's important that it's be made very clear, but I think that the applicant themselves has made very clear their willingness to work to try and meet those standards. Because in the end, if they don't meet those standards, they don't get the grant money. That's kind of the whole point here, is that they need to be sure that they're following what has been laid out before them by Historic Preservation Committee and this board, so that they're not sent down the wrong path, but that they have an idea of the work that is expected of them in order to receive the grant funding. And I believe, and I feel confident that Mr. Turner has made that very clear, that he is willing to make those concessions to help this. It's unfortunate in this review here where it does talk about moving and recessing the entrance from the north side to the north side of the facade radically does change and obscures some of the character defining features, but they also do say here is that the current solution is necessary to meet ADA requirements, and that therefore they have no recommendation for mitigation effects. And so that's why I feel it would be in our best interest to follow the Historic Preservation Committee's recommendation, which has been to mitigate as much of some of the changes would have to the historic preservation, and to ensure that the work that's being done is to the best of our abilities to preserve and what historic elements we can of that building.
Member Bridges?
Thank you very much. I wholeheartedly agree. I go back to the line. It says it is Northwind reviewed the proposed work required for compliance with the ADA using the following statement on accessibility provided in the standards. It is often necessary to make modifications to a historic building to make it compliant with accessibility code requirements. Federal rules, regulations, and standards provide guidance on how to make historic buildings accessible. Work must be carefully planned and undertaken in a manner which results in minimal or no loss of historic exterior and interior character, defining spaces, features, and finishes. The goal should be to provide the highest level of access with the least impact to the historic building. I feel with the work that's been done going through twice with Historic Preservation Committee, with Northwind, with the Secretary of the Interior Standards, and ADA, that, from my perspective, that you've met that criteria. I do absolutely get the sense that that is of the highest priority. And I know we put together the standards for this funding, worked really hard to put together, and I believe you addressed each one of those items pretty carefully, specifically. And so I see no problem in going forward in terms of the grant funding for this period.
Thank you. I did bring a rendition of what the interior is going to look like. If y'all are interested in seeing it, I can pass it around.
Other questions or comments from board members? Member Folda?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Mr. Turner, you've applied for the RDA grant before, the regular RDA, correct?
Mm-hmm.
How many projects would you say you've used RDA for?
Let's see. Dillinger, I think we had an issue where the street sweeper hit our sign.
Just the estimate of how many, do you know?
I'm just speaking out loud.
Yeah.
I think that was like 10,000 or something. Forge Social House and 1129 Arizona Street, which is now the Bistro.
Okay, so you've done this process several times before.
I have.
Okay, so you're familiar with that. So normally, how do you go through this process? You normally, I assume, kind of make up some mock plans, what you want, and then you go to submit that with the RDA, correct?
Yeah, it's pretty well defined.
Okay. So for this particular grant, and I think the mayor has tried to reiterate that as well, that this particular grant is to preserve the historic nature of the building. And so it's not approached with what the applicant wants it to change into. It's what we can do to preserve what existed or restore what was taken away. So the problem that we had, and I think why we had to send it back, is because there was kind of this list of what I'm going to do with the building, but it wasn't what is the building now, or what it was. And so we've been trying to, see what fits and what's eligible and what's not eligible, because, I mean, it wasn't, in my perspective of what you proposed, wasn't really trying to keep the building as it was, but make it into a new use, correct?
That we changed the use of the building?
Mm-hmm.
That was the intent.
Right, and so a lot of the changes that are being made
You mean
are
from
to
an
fit around that.
antique store to a separate use?
I meant the whole changing is the function of the building, right? You propose the window changes and things like that to fit the function that you are going to be using it for.
Form follows function.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're trying to help you understand that what we're looking for is historic preservation in this grant, and that the ADA issues and things, that is also, something that's in the normal RDA. I want you to understand that this, what we've got now, where we've gone down to basically is now an RDA rehab project. I feel like we've kind of lost anything that it was actually restoration or preservation in this particular building. That said, this is, this is public funds, and so we really do scrutinize where things, where this money goes. This is public money. And I feel like some of the costs that you were asking for were exaggerated. This building, and maybe, I'm not sure if you
What are you basing that on?
So I'm asking of some of the costs that you were requesting for. So on all three of your proposals that you provided for the council to review for this grant, there were several items in there that you required the price to be set. One being the historic Stagecoach bar, set at $18,500.
How much did you buy that bar for?
Are
are you publicly accusing us of inflating the numbers?
I'm asking, why was the number come to this number?
Specifically in the Stagecoach Bar?
Specifically, that's one of the highest items on your bid besides electric. If you don't feel free to answer, that's fine, because
I
it's
could
now,
answer in detail,
it's now
but-
listed as an ineligible project. But I'm asking you that these are public funds, and I'm asking,
So that's an ineligible project fund?
at this
I
point,
have,
it's now
I could
listed
answer
now.
specifically what we purchased it for, the restoration costs, the
Right.
reinstallation costs. I
I'm
could
just
answer all
wondering how
those
you get to that price.
specifically, but are you accusing us of inflating numbers on the bids?
You're asking for this amount of money from public funds, from the public, and you don't think it's justifiable?
Mr. Turner, excuse me, Mr. Turner, I would expect that you're going to maintain a professional appearance here, okay? I understand
Similarly.
you may not like the question, but let's not have any outward physical displays, all right? Thank you.
If you're,
I think I'm gonna just excuse myself from the dais, thank you.
okay. Mr. Mays, I have a couple of questions for you. Do you mind? Mr. Mays, with ADA, that is technically a federal compliance, correct? And then we have some others within our building codes as well.
Well, and there's also state compliance with ADA.
Okay. Is there any exceptions to it for historic properties, or do our codes allow for variances?
In this case, no, because this is a change in use. So I think what you're referring to is there are provisions within the existing building code, the IBC, that talk about when you have a historic property, you can vary from certain code requirements. Because of the change in use and because this is ADA, those are not items that can be exempted from.
Would there be, in other, this is gonna be something we're gonna come across a lot, because most main streets come out straight to a sidewalk. And not all not all historic main streets are flat. Most of them have some sort of a pitch at some point. So when looking at other main streets and what they've done, they've changed the slope of the sidewalk in front of the buildings to make it more ADA so that the businesses have more accessibility to them. Is changing the sidewalk an option in front of the building to provide that space to make it ADA without having to remove the door?
Since the sidewalk is a continued sidewalk that is serving multiple properties, you have to take into consideration how it then impacts the next door property.
Correct. But if it was found that they could do it with the correct slope, is that something that could be considered?
If it addressed all of the properties and didn't provide any further conflicts, to my knowledge, based on city review of this, that was not a viable alternative to try to address it in that manner, which is the reason why the proposed a cove, the 7-foot inward, has to be provided somewhere along the building frontage.
So I've looked at the federal code, and it even has an exception for historic buildings that the slope can be slightly higher than normal, accepted for historic buildings to be able to preserve the structure of the building. Is that something that can be considered?
Well, and certainly in anticipation of this question, what we did is we conferred with our acting building official who reviewed the building codes, and it was his determination that an exemption can't be provided in this case.
So nothing in Nevada allows for that exception? I'm just trying to get an understanding, because I know that, well, I came from California, and so they have exceptions in their code, and I would assume that they're more strict than what Nevada would have.
Yeah, I can only, because I did anticipate this question, and so I consulted to ensure whether there was an opportunity to provide relief, and there isn't.
Okay. Thank you. With that said, I feel like this is, it's really an ADA project, a remodel. at the end of the day. It's not really restoring or keeping the historic features of the front of the building. And I think it sets a bad precedent. I think that anyone on Main Street after this would say, I'm doing a remodel too. And as long as I add some ramps, then you're going to cover 50% of my project. And I think this board really needs to consider that.
Member Bridges?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to try to maintain non-being disturbed by this, because I feel there are a list of items apparently on page 29 that are ineligible, including the low voltage electrical, lighting, drywall, signs, the bar, historic stagecoach bar, drop ceiling, the tile, carpet, wallpaper, windows and glass, soundproofing, and the awning, and that it's very clear that those items are not being submitted now, nor will they be in the future for reimbursement. Also, secondly, I believe that this is a reimbursement situation, so it's in their best interest to follow the guidelines and the approved way of dealing with this. Again, I go back to that statement about there are requirements of ADA that will require changes, even in a historic building, in order to meet the current requirements. Thirdly, I feel that they have gone above and beyond to receive the approval of the Historic Preservation Committee and Northwind's working with SHPO. And I don't know if it's appropriate, I would like to make a motion to accept their request at this time for the...
If you would like to make a motion, you're free to do so, Member
Yes.
Bridges.
I would like to make a motion to accept resolution number 230, authorizing the RDA to fund the eligible improvement costs related to 524 Nevada Way for this $36,868.
Is there a second?
I'll second it for discussion.
My discussion is that I am still not comfortable with some of the commitments. Any other discussion prior to calling the vote?
I have some questions here real quick. Just in this, and this might be more for our city attorney, or possibly Mr. Mays, in this motion and what is before us here, does that include the additions or the comments in the review by the Historic Preservation Committee regarding the not touching the parapet, also with regards to the windows and the doors and that size? Sorry, yeah, Mr. Mays, it might be. Or do we need to go through each of those items here in this to make sure that that is?
I think it's appropriate to identify those items for confirmation in relationship to the resolution.
Would it be able to be amended to include that it includes all recommendations made by the Historic Preservation Committee? Is that good, or does it have to be made clear each individual item, or are we able to kind of so that we don't miss anything that the Historic Preservation Committee might have suggested?
Well, going back to the Historic Preservation Committee's recommendation, it was predicated on Northwind's final report. So you have Northwind's report in front of you. There was a verbal commitment by the applicant regarding the windows and the parapet during that meeting. There's been discussion tonight regarding the door and preservation of the door. I think it would be appropriate to make the motion conditioned on those items.
And I would recommend amending the motion to contain those items.
Accept the amendment.
Any other discussion? Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, I'm really concerned about this whole thing. As I said at the last meeting, I think it's more of an RDA thing rather than an historical RDA. I'm concerned that the questions that Ms. Folda has asked were not answered, And I'm just a little bit concerned with the whole situation, so thank you.
Any other comments?
I have a comment. I brought up the financial because we never discussed it the last time this was brought forward. And things that were on there were originally eligible, and I wanted to ask about them. I could ask about any item on there. Apparently that one was a sore spot or something. I'm not sure why that I got the reaction that I did. But I think it's justifiable to state why public funds should be used for certain elements of your project and to justify that. You know, there's certain findings in this guideline that I don't think have been met for historic. I feel like this, what's being asked would definitely fall under an RDA grant. I don't see any problem with anything that they're requesting for following that. But the questions that are asked for this historic preservation grant that are different from the RDA does this project meet the city's plans and goals for historic preservation? I don't feel that they do, because we're changing the storefront so dramatically. The other requirement was sorry. Why I brought up the money was, the question was, does the project have a reasonable budget that meets the goals of the grant program? So I was addressing some budget items on there. So I just don't feel like this meets this particular guideline. I have a concern for the precedent that it sets, because any building that's considered historic in the historic district could just come in and say that they want to remodel their money, and I don't see them being denied if we accept this the way we are accepting it or you know, that it's being the motion is tonight.
I'm happy to answer any legitimate budget questions.
Mr. Turner, now's not the time, okay? We have a motion and we have a second on the floor. This is time for discussion by the board members for this. Any other discussion by board members with regard to the motion on the floor? Member Adams.
I'll just make one last comment with regards to precedents that set, you know, on the opposite end is where my concern is that any time a historic property comes up that in which ADA may call into question some of the historic needs, they would simply say, well, you know, I'm going to have to make these things. What point is there to even try and spare any of it? Why historic preservation seems to have no, is not important if ADA accessibility is going to be an issue, and therefore I don't have to care at all. So that's what I'm concerned about, setting that precedent.
Member Bridges.
Yes, sir. I also want to talk about the precedents on the opposite end. And what it is we have interested citizens with businesses interested in keeping the historic nature of our community, and in establishing this grant and in requesting this grant, they're attempting to follow our guidelines. Instead of going off and saying we're going to do the best we can with the money we've got, they're saying we'd really like to do it the way it's supposed to be done and to make it the best we can. Because they can go ahead and make changes without our funding. But what we're saying is, well, we're going to be really, really picky about who we fund, and we're going to be, and if you don't want to really follow exactly what it is, whatever that looks like, then we're going to get people buying buildings and doing renovations and attempting to put together ADA requirements and say, well, we're just going to do it the best we can. We're not going to worry about historic preservation. We're not going to worry about SHPO. We're not going to worry about Northwind. We'll just do what we think is right. And I certainly don't like the direction of that personally. I like the direction of doing the best you can and coming back with even better information so that we can support as well as possible the historic preservation of our community.
Any other discussion?
May I?
You may not, sir. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Motion fails. Anyone else wishing to make a motion with regard to resolution number 230?
The agenda item is written so that a regular RDA grant could be considered if applicants are interested in that, but
It does not appear they are. All right. No one else then wishing to take further action on item number 3?
Mayor, if the applicant would wish to do the regular RDA, they need a motion for that.
with the applicant not here to explain whether they're interested in that, I don't know. The agenda item is written such that the agency can consider a regular RDA application. Staff is prepared and has data available on what those eligible expenses would be. The total funding would be $39,013. The amount is larger because there's more funding available in the traditional RDA fund.
Mayor, then I would move to approve regular RDA under the requirement that the applicant reapply under that grant.
Well, I'm not sure that we can have a motion on that basis.
Yeah, we'd have to have an application. The application would be converting the existing historic preservation grant into the traditional RDA. Again, without the applicant here, I don't know.
Could there be,
Member Hoskins?
could there be a direction that we could make that they would be asked if they would like to apply for that?
I guess I don't see the value in that motion. Certainly, they could apply for an application. There's the opportunity, I guess, this evening, if the RDA board is interested in moving forward with approval of the regular RDA grant, but a motion encouraging them to apply, I don't know what that does. I mean, certainly they could apply for that.
I understand.
Member Bridges?
Yeah, and the flip side of that is they could apply for the regular RDA grant for this year for the $39,000 and change. However, they would not be able to apply for the remaining $63,000, correct? Or would they still be able to have access to the additional $63,000 for next year?
No, that is correct, because you would be mixing the two projects, and it would either be through the historic preservation grant or the regular RDA grant.
Okay, would they be able to apply for additional RDA funds next year for the same project?
That's 39.
Yes, the 39,000 is the total for the project.
Would be the total for the project. Thank
What's eligible, yes.
Member Adams?
So just to be clear, and to my understanding, we could, essentially the motion could be that we approve of them to receive the RDA funds, and then the applicant could then later determine whether or not they want to use that. They can say that they don't want to, or they say they could, and that way it at least allows that opportunity rather than having to have us go through this whole process one more time. Is that
I think
correct?
Yes. But I'm looking at our city attorney.
Yeah, I'm not sure that resolution 230...
Well, I mean, we have an amended version here ready that we could approve it for the traditional RDA grant, but the applicant applied for the historic preservation grant. So I think you would have to have the applicant's sort of willingness to, you'd have to have that application in front of you. Without the applicants here to say whether or not they'd even be I would have pause about making a finding on that.
And again, I would point out that the resolution that was put forward by Member Bridges was specific to the wording of what we had. We did not get to a point of being able to amend that further, or that there was anyone willing to do that at the time. That was the way the motion was presented. I think it's important that we understand there was a motion presented, a second was made, an amendment was made, and the vote was taken on that. There were no further offers to amend the motion further.
That is correct. Yeah, this wouldn't be amendment to that. This would be a new motion.
Okay? Member Bridges?
Yeah, if they, say they went back and put it all back in a bowl again, mixed it all up and got a better outcome in terms of changes to the building, would it be possible for them to apply for this same grant next year?
Okay, I think we're starting to get beyond where we need to be with this.
Right.
If the applicant wishes to do that, they can certainly take advantage of that.
Okay, so once they start a project, can they then apply for the historic preservation grant, or does it have to be asked for at the beginning?
Once again, I think we're getting astray of what it is. That's a determination not for this particular question. Mr. Mays, if you have an answer, please go ahead.
Okay. You cannot apply for funds if you've already started the work. So that answers that question. Yes.
Okay, so we've had a motion. The motion did not carry. Anyone else wishing to make a motion with regard to what we have agendized, which is resolution number 230? Then we will move on to our final public comment period. Thank you, Mr. Fistection. Public comment during this portion. Again, this is the final public comment period for the redevelopment agency meeting. We are running over into the council meeting time, but this public comment is for the redevelopment agency meeting. Public comment during this period of time may be on any issue. Speakers will have up to 5 minutes, and as always, please be concise and civil in your comments. The number to call is 702-589-9629. Again, this is the redevelopment agency meeting. This is our final public comment period for that meeting. Anyone wishing to speak, the number is 702-589-9629. All right, hearing no one for the final public comment period of the redevelopment agency meeting, the comment period is now closed. We will adjourn the redevelopment agency meeting, and we will convene the city council meeting at 7:30. Thank you.